In this video, we're going to be covering BeyondTrust Product Active Directory Bridge and BeyondInsight Unix and Linux web interface. For the use case, we're going to be installing and setting up BIUL management interface and ADB. And we're going to demonstrate Active Directory user sign-in for Red Hat Enterprise Server 7.5 and SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 12.4. This slide shows the before and after for Active Directory Bridge. And the typical scenario, you have your user, they're typically using Active Directory accounts to sign in to Windows devices, but this same user is using local accounts to sign into their corresponding Unix and Linux systems. With Active Directory Bridge, all of those user accounts are all using Active Directory. You can also use single sign-on to sign into Windows, Linux, or Unix system regardless of what operating system. This slide shows the workflow for Active Directory Bridge and the ports required. At the top here you have your admin and they sign in to a web interface, a BIUL, and this is done over 4443. And then after we've configured BIUL and deployed the Active Directory Bridge agent to the corresponding systems, we'll then be able to sign in with Active Directory user accounts to each one of those corresponding Unix and Linux systems. And this system here has both BIUL and the ADB agent installed on it. And here I'm connected to that system that we're going to install BIUL and the ADB agent on. And so I'm using MOBA Xterm. If you're familiar with it, I'm just going to go through these tabs at the top. This is the Red Hat server at .3. You can see the version number here. Here is another Red Hat server we have. We're going to install the ADB agent on another 7.5, and we have the SUSE 12.4 endpoint here as well. Moving back to the Red Hat system, we're going to install BeyondInsight Unix and Linux on. I'm just going to copy over this RPM file that you can download by contacting your BeyondTrust sales representative. And we also have installs for Windows if you prefer that operating system, but in this video we're just going to go over the Unix and Linux install for this web server. And so I'm just going to copy that over, and you can use any file transfer tool you prefer. So now that that file is copied over, we're just going to run that install. There you can see it's installed and it's saying to start the service. Use that command there. And of course, to check the status, you can go service, EB SMC. Spell it right. There we go. And you can see there it's running and active. So making sure that that service is started and running, we're now going to go to open up a browser and go to that IP address of the system you installed it on, port 443, and you can see here I've just made this bookmark to make it convenient. So you're going to go to the same IP address. There you can see 10.0.0.3 and the port 443. And of course, since it's just an IP address, there you'll get the certificate warning. You can just proceed. And now you'll get the wizard on your first deployment of BIUL. And we're just going to go through a couple of steps here. Go ahead and hit next. And you're going to fill in your username and password. There I've configured a host user. Once you've done that, you can hit next step. And now it's going to ask for some host credentials. And you can typically, it's going to be for the root account, or you can create an account on those Linux boxes that we're going to manage that all have that same username and password, so we can use it to manage them and deploy software. There you see I have root credentials configured. Go ahead and hit next and finish. It'll take you back to the BIUL webpage, but now instead of that prompt, we're getting, or that config wizard, we're now getting a sign-in prompt. And go ahead and sign in with those credentials that you provisioned in step 2. And there you have it. You've logged in to BIUL, and we've installed it on a Red Hat Linux system. And a correction, please make sure you're going to port 4443. And once you're signed in, we're going to click on Host Inventory, and we're going to click Add Hosts and scan for hosts. We can go ahead and put in an IP range, and mine is 10.0.0.1, 10.0.0. We'll say 10. And go ahead and hit scan for host. That scan should run pretty quickly, and you should see some host return. And once you have some hosts in there, we're just going to check all of them, and this actions button will appear, and we're going to go perform host actions. We're going to profile these hosts. Next step. And we're going to use that root credential we set up in the config wizard. And since it's root, we don't need sudo or anything else. And go ahead and hit finish. Once that profiling finished, if everything is green, good to go. If you have any red X's, you can hit this View Task Details, and it will provide you a list of really detailed logs and any errors that might have happened. Once you've scanned and profiled your host, you should see all the corresponding DNS names. And if you need to add additional credentials, go ahead and click on this Host tab. And there's this Host Credentials icon. And you see there's those root credentials that we added in the config wizard. But if you need to modify those, of course, you can do that here or add additional credentials for additional systems. Now we're going to change some settings for BeyondInsight Unix and Linux. If you click the Gears tab here under Settings, you'll see there's a couple of options here. And first, we're going to go to Software icon. And as you can see, there's going to be a couple of items that we'll need to load. And specifically the AD bridge install. And you can do that very easily by clicking this upload arrow button and finding that file that you need, that you should have been downloaded from BeyondTrust support, or you can contact your BeyondTrust sales rep. And for ADB, it is a zip file, and you can see it's about a 200 megabyte file, so it is pretty large, but it does contain all the required installs that you can deploy from BeyondInsight Unix and Linux. So now, after you selected that zip file, you should see here a green circle for AD Bridge and the version that you loaded. Jumping over to the Windows side now, you see I just have a Windows 10 Enterprise device here. Any Windows 10 system will do. And I've also downloaded Remote Server Administrative Tools, or the administrative tools for Windows 10. Now we're going to install this AD Bridge MSI. And you should just need to accept the defaults. It will ask you to close some files or programs that you have open. And we're going to launch the config wizard. So now we'll step through this configuration wizard. Go ahead and hit next until we get to here. Now you will need to make sure your account that you're signed in to your Windows system has schema admin permissions. Once the user is a schema admin and you've logged off and logged back in with those permissions, you hit that promote attributes, you should see all green checkboxes. Go ahead and hit next. Now we're going to create the default cell. And for this, I've already created a group that we're going to provision. I'm just going to jump over to Active Directory Users and Computers. And under my groups, I have this ADB login group. And as you can see, there's a few members in there already. And I'm going to provision this group so that these users can log in using their Active Directory credentials into those Linux and Unix systems. So go ahead and hit provision. I'm going to find that name, search ADB, there it is. Go ahead and hit OK. It's going to provision that as the default cell. Next, it's going to ask to create a license container. Here we can take the default, go ahead and hit next. And we're going to create it at the root. Once that's created, go ahead and hit next. We're going to create the group policy object. Go ahead and hit next, hit create here. And we're going to keep hitting next again. And we're going to hit finish. Now that that's finished, let's hit the start menu on your Windows system and you should see a folder called BeyondTrust AD Bridge. And go ahead and open that up and select AD Bridge Cell Manager. And you should expand the arrows out and you should see now that group that we added, ADB login group. And you should also see the two users that from that group. They all now have corresponding UID and GIDs that have been auto-generated. You can also set a login shell or a home directory if needed. Now we're going to open up Group Policy Management on your Windows system. And I've created an OU called Linux Systems and created a new policy called ADB Group Policy. This is where we're going to store all of our Linux systems that are onboarded and be applying this policy. And so to take a look at this policy, you right-click and hit Edit. And you can go ahead and expand out policies and Unix and Linux settings. And I've made a couple of changes already that we'll take a look at, and you'll want to replicate this in your lab. So under BeyondTrust AD Bridge settings, we're going to look at authorization and identification. And you can see I've changed a couple of settings here. One to call out is we'll see this eftestlab.com before the name of that AD users in the SSH terminal when they try to sign in. So they'll know they're getting that prompt, that it's unique to Active Directory and it's not a local prompt. Just a few other default settings such as cache expiration, the default home directory. Also under logon, I've set the logon group here and just add your group as you normally would any Active Directory group. I've set that to true. There's also if a denied or a bad password or a denied login, you can set a specific error message there. I've just used the default. And I've set this to true as well as this one down here. The last one we're going to look at is Group Policy Agent. And I've just updated that to 5 minutes. That is the minimum interval you can update it to. And sorry, a few more settings we're going to have to look at here in Group Policy. We also want to open up message settings and password prompts. And if you could set this to a custom password prompt, that way we know when an Active Directory user is logging in, they will see this prompt to know that it is an AD account and they're looking for that AD password. One other item in Active Directory users and computers, make sure you go to the root of your domain, right-click it and go to Properties. And you'll want to select the AD Bridge Cell Setting tab at the top and make sure this checkbox is checked, and it'll potentially ask you for a yes/no prompt. Just hit yes and make sure that your users that you have here are matched the users you imported, and see it's going to add domain users. I just wanted to do my ADB login group with those 2 users in it. Jumping back over to BeyondInsight Unix and Linux web interface, we're going to add a couple more credentials and some directory integration here. So go ahead and click the host icon and then host credentials. And go ahead and hit manage credentials at the top and create credential. Here we're going to add an Active Directory credential that has domain join permissions. Make sure to use the fully qualified domain name. I'm going to do a short description here. And go ahead and save that account there. Next, we're going to do the directory integration. Go ahead and click the settings icon and click Directory Services. Go ahead and hit Add Connection. And I'm just going to type the IP address of my domain controller in this instance. Of course, you're going to want to have a fully qualified domain name using secure credentials and a secure port. For this instance, we're going to disable that and just use port 389 for testing. And go ahead and put in those fully qualified domain credentials. And hit Test Settings. And if the test completed successfully, go ahead and hit Save Directory. So now we're going to use BIUL to deploy Active Directory Bridge to a few Linux and Unix systems and automatically have it join those systems to the domain. So going under Host Inventory, I'm just going to select all the hosts we have. I'm going to select Actions, Perform Host Actions. I'm going to select the Active Directory Bridge radio button and hit Next Steps. I'm going to want to install Active Directory Bridge. And here you actually see you can make it optional to join the domain if you want to. I like to do them in both the same steps, so we're going to do it. And you see there's the information that we included in the directory integration. I'm going to go ahead and hit Browse here and browse to the OU I want all my Linux systems to be in, which is the OU Linux systems. You see there, it populated it. It's going to ask next for those AD credentials. I'm going to select those that we added in the earlier step. And any additional arguments, we don't need to add that for now, but you see here's the command it's going to use up at the top, and it's going to run that command on all of those systems with those AD Bridge packages that we loaded earlier. Going ahead and hit Next Steps. It's going to ask for the credentials to run those actual commands, and we're going to want to select the root credentials. And finish. Once that completes, you should now see the agent button highlighted as well as the joined item highlighted. That means that agent has been installed and it has been joined to the domain that you specified. In this case, it's eftestlab.com. To take a look at these systems in Active Directory, we're going to open up Active Directory users and computers. And if we go to our Linux systems OU that we specified, we would see our systems have been added to that OU automatically that we're applying that group policy to. And now we're ready to sign into those Linux systems with Active Directory accounts. Just taking a look at the accounts we're going to use here in my Active Directory OU accounts. I have A. Miller and M. Davis as the accounts we're going to log in with. Now I'm going to open up MOBA Xterm and punch in my A. Miller account. And you see I'm getting my eftestlab.com AD password prompt, letting you know that you are getting the policy. And there, I'm logged in as A. Miller. You can see when I run Who Am I? A. Miller. And there I've logged in with an Active Directory account to that Linux system. As you can see, that was for one of our Red Hat systems we were testing with. Now let's log into the SUSE box with the M. Davis account. See there, I'm getting the Active Directory prompt as well. And there I just got the save password prompt, but I don't need to save it. And there you see I'm logged in as M. Davis to that SUSE box. Another really great feature, I'm going to log into our other Red Hat device here as root. And if I go to opt-pbis/bin, you'll see there's a ton of commands in there, and the one we're going to run right now is a GP update on a Linux system, and I can pretty much pull down that policy if I make any updates to it in Active Directory, and you have the ability to run a GP update on a Linux system just like you would a Windows system. Now you see GPO update succeeded. Coming back to our slide here, this is what we went through. We have our admin that signed in to Red Hat and SUSE devices using Active Directory credentials. If you liked what you see, please go to BeyondTrust.com and check out our products.